On this edition of Graco Garage, we'll be looking at wiring an external scale to your SaniForce 2.0 sanitary drum unloader or tote unloader. To start things off, we want to make sure that we are pulling enough of our input line from the sensor or from the scale into the box to meet the control card. We're going to be targeting the PLC module X20CM8281, looking at terminals 14 and 16. In order to get these in, you have to push the associated black push terminal on the terminal block and also insert your input lead into the appropriate terminal port. Once again, we're looking at 14 and 16. This will be our 4 to 20 milliamp analog signal from the scale. This takes a little bit of time. They're pretty small. But once they're in, just check to make sure they're in good condition. All right, now let's look at setting up the scale. First, we're going to get into our input and output setup and scale selection. We'll do that by first going to our settings, going up to the I/O tab for input output tab. And in here, we're just going to see a couple of options. We're looking at the feedback type. That is what type of scale we're using. In this case, we are using a positive scale, which means that we are sending material to the scale. There's a couple of other options there as well for pulse meters and for negative scales. But once again, we're using the positive scale. We're sending material to the scale. You want to check your signal and calibrate. Best way to check the signal, you have your scale tied in, is push on the scale. If the value increases, that tells you that you did something right and that your signal is going to the PLC and telling the SaniForce 2.0 unloader that you have an input. Notice here the 4 milliamp mass, that's your low. Your 20 milliamp mass, that's your high. Make sure you have your calibrated drum handy or calibration drum handy with a liner if you have that, or whatever the container is, so that you're loading it with the correct value on the scale. Just to point out some auxiliary outputs as well. This is for your use or control with other PLCs in the system. You have a lot of different functions that you can look at adding to the process. If you have light curtains, if you have signal lights, if you want to start the pump, if you want to have something that triggers when the pump is done, as well as, of course, having interlocks to start, stop, as well as showing a job complete in your PLC program. And this just shows you if you have those wired up, the I/O status gives you an idea of what's wired up, what's actually in place, and some values that your PLC is currently reading on the unloader that you're using. Now we're going to just briefly look at the network tab. This is for if you have some form of internet or intranet in your system, you have an Ethernet connection, any of those types of things. This is where you would look at that. And to look at batching, you have a scale set up, maybe you want to batch. You want to go back to your settings for your automated sequence. You want to select the batching if that's what you would like to do. And then you're going to change some of your recipe settings. Okay, and this is going to give you a place to actually go in, do some modification. Okay, and you'll notice here that there's a default batch size. That's where you're going to be setting your batch size. Once you've done that, you save your recipe. You should be able to go through and make sure that you have a default batch size set or your batch size set and run through your automated sequence to the batch that you are looking to complete.